In this course, I've tried to present a progression from traditional linguistic equivalence-based approaches. I mentioned the Scopus approach. I've suggested that it suffers from a lack of attention to indeterminacy and is therefore limited. So I gave a talk on indeterminacy in translation. And I stick with that in general, there is not one fixed meaning that we translate. The source text is indeterminate. Then I suggested last week that a way forward is look at what other disciplines do when they handle uncertainty. And risk management, for me, is the obvious way forward. We start to look at translators' decisions as if they were decisions made in business, with the rich panoply of mathematical and conceptual armor that we have available for looking at that kind of decision. It's nothing new, it's a logical thing, it's not revolutionary, I think. Now, when I adopt that perspective, I come up against some pretty serious problems of a very practical kind. And one of them, the main one, I think, is this notion of quality. It's assumed that a translation can be correct or incorrect, but when you think about it, is there absolute perfection? Probably not. It's a gradation of values. Some are acceptable, some are not acceptable, some could be made acceptable. How do we handle that range? How do we conceptualize it without reference to the ideal of a perfect translation? The essentialist approach would be to say, there is 100% quality, and I'm going to measure how far I am from it. I don't believe that that exists except in cases of terminology or fixed authorities. Okay, my first lecture was about authorities deciding what is correct or not in translation. So if I abandon that ideal of 100% quality, how can I assess quality? What is it? I hasten to add that the PowerPoint is in German today, but it's my German because I did it too late and my corrector hasn't corrected it. So it's likely to be of inferior quality as an experiment, okay? Don't laugh, please. I realize that my corrector could revise it. It won't be perfect, but it could be better. I wonder, though, if it's good enough for us here today. Probably, yes, it is good enough. What does that mean, good enough? Here's an example. Well, no, I want to talk first about how this problem surfaces in actual research. I have a research group. We do empirical research. We'd like to find, how women translate differently from men, professionals from novices, young people from old people, things like that, okay? And often in the research project, we have the idea, well, let's see what happens to quality. For example, speed. I make my classes translate and then 30% faster. And we see quality sometimes go down. What is quality, though? How can we assess it? The temptation is for an academic to say, oh, well, I will grade this as if it were an exam, and the exam grade is quality. And that is what's mostly done. Some researchers, though, have given translations to 5 academics and then 5 professional revisers from industry in the field concerned. And how do they compare? What's the difference between the way an academic assesses quality and somebody in the profession? Any guesses? Who finds the most errors? The academics, systematically. Especially with interference. With German, you have lots of English invading the language or being accepted into the language. The academics tend to say this is not correct terminology or this syntactic construction is not properly German, whereas people in the field, in industry, are far more liberal, far more inclined to accept something as being close enough to be acceptable for the industry for this purpose. So who are we academics to say what is quality if the people actually paying for the quality in industry don't care that much? Okay, that's the first problem. The second problem is if you get 3 academics, they will all give different grades, and 3 professionals from industry, they'll all give different grades. They find different things. A student of mine did this once. She found in the ATA, American Translators Association, certification exams, she found that the graders marked different things as being incorrect, and then all agreed on the global pass-fail ratio. It's as if they all decided intuitively, yes, it's good enough, and then found reasons to justify their decision. We don't know if it happens like that, but when you get into the workings of quality, it's not a stable thing. There's a lot of guesswork, intuition, subjectivity involved in it. For that reason, I'm interested in a discourse on quality. I can't tell you here today what quality is, I won't do that, but I'm interested in the way people talk about what quality is. Perhaps if you're doing some empirical research, or you have to write in some way on the quality of translations for your masters, this might concern you and keep you out of trouble. My first example is this. It's from a conference, actually, when a translation teacher used this example about how badly her students translated. Actually, it was interpreting, but my point works the same for written translation. Okay, it's a sort of problem that a written translation can do by Googling it very quickly and you'll get the terminology, right? But this was in conference interpreting, so it wasn't possible to do that. And the teacher was upset. I don't know what this is in Spanish, or French, my languages. The teacher was upset because the translators into Italian, in this case, had rendered it as the Wild West, the land of cowboys and Indians and plants that we know nothing about. It said, oh, bad, bad, bad. This is omission of content, -2 points or something. And I was in the conference, I looked around to an Italian friend and said, what? This is brilliant. This is the most superb translation. I mean, if it's in a conference, you're trying to convey to people how exotic this location is, right? You know, it's not a conference on these plants. It's like cowboys and Indians and all these strange plants. This is brilliant. It's off the cuff, it's quick, it's efficient, it's easily understood. I mean, if you gave the technical terms, probably half the audience wouldn't recognize them. So I would give that 100% for an elegant solution. The teacher, however, the translation professor, the guardian of linguistic exactitude, decided that that was negative. And this is when I started to get worried about what quality is in the academic discourse, even before we get into industry. And I'm very interested in these kinds of elegant solutions that require not much work and have maximum effect. For me, that's brilliant. For just about everybody else, it's a mistake. I start from the proposition, as does Andrew Chesterman, an English scholar living and working in Finland. I put a link to his lecture online. He gives a lecture on quality, and he says, well, quality, a translation is good, but good for what? Skopos question. And he says, well, this says quality is always a relation to something. It's not inherent in the text. It's this text in relation to, and there are a series of things that it could be. The first is the start text. The natural reaction is to look over here and say, oh, I've got sagebrush, brush, and tumbleweed over in here, and here I've got ignorance, confession of ignorance. That's not equivalent, therefore points off. But that's only one relation, comparing the two texts. When the text was produced, the start text was not around. Nobody was making that relation. That's not the space that quality had to be activated, at least in that particular case. So we could move to the function of the start text, as I did in my analysis. And then I said, well, that text there is supposed to make this conference setting sound exotic. That's its function. This translation fulfills that function, therefore it's good. So my notion of quality has changed depending on the relation I'm looking at. Okay, that's very simple. This is Skopos stuff. It doesn't get us any further than that. However, we know that the target text can have a different function in some instances, in which cases we have to know that purpose, which, as I pointed out, is yet another essentialism. But if we can guess at something like that purpose, we could look at the relation to the target text. Christiane Nord makes quite an interesting statement somewhere. She says that an error, which would be an absence of quality, an error is a Nichterfüllung. It's non-compliance with the client's commission, or the client's instruction, Auftrag, okay, brief, commission, instructions, I think I'm happy with in English. When you don't carry out your client's instructions, that is a lack of quality. And this is yet another relation, because the instructions may be quite different from the other things that you have around you. And when you think about it, you're going to get paid because you follow out your client's instructions. And a lack of quality at the end of the day should mean a lack of money, right? So this would be the relation to prioritize, perhaps. In the industry, though, in certification exams, in a lot of the training programs, though, we have an appeal to something quite different, something called best practices. Best practices just means that this is the way it's done by professionals. And if you don't do it in this way, you're not going to achieve professional quality. So we have some best practices, for example, for using or not using translation memory or machine translation, for using technology. Or best practice is to ascertain the client's purpose first and before you start translating. Or when I was being trained, not in translation, but anyway, we were always taught, before you translate, read the whole text first. Best practice, so you know what it's about. And then we discover that professionals don't actually do that. That is not a best practice because nobody has the time to do it. They just get in and start and make sense as they go along. Now, best practices is an interesting construct for quality because it is entirely essentialist and idealistic. It assumes there is this ideal professional who does a professional job, and this professional person is repeated across 330,000 professionals in the world who all do the same thing because that's what a profession is. It's an interesting assumption that can't be true. However, we do make it. If you go to see your doctor or your dentist and you say, "What's wrong with me?" you don't want your doctor or dentist to say, "Well, personally, on the basis of what happened last week, I think that you should do this." No. You want to know what's really wrong with you and what you really have to do on the assumption that the advice you get is the same for all professionals. It's yet another professional fiction that here reappears as some kind of guarantee of quality. This suggests that quality is not so much a thing that people actually measure as a thing that people talk about. It's a construct projected by a certain discourse on the profession. Professionals do this, therefore that is quality. So if you get a professional, you will get quality. And this is the way the concept has been displaced in the industry, as I hope to show very soon. Okay? Of course, the other kind of best practice is what I mentioned, the professor, the academic, as expert. However, well, that's also possible. I make a point that most academics, like myself, are or have been professional translators. Okay, a survey we did of some 300 translation scholars found that I think only 5% of them had not translated professionally. I mean, translate or interpret. Okay, so people like myself do have that experience and are able to talk about what happens in industry. Unfortunately, along the way, something else happens, and they seem to get in other criteria of quality, or they did their industrial experience a decade or two ago. And industry moves on, new terms come in, new practices come in, and the teaching profession tends to lag behind quite seriously. Yeah, what is quality? The bottom line, getting paid. Something to think about. And probably other things you could imagine. In the academic discourse on quality, we do find a reference to something called 100% quality, which is this idealistic illusion that I refuse to accept. And it's in a survey done of translation companies. It was carried out by the European Masters in Translation, of which yours is a member, I believe. So you should be closely in touch with this research in the Optimale project. Okay? The translation companies were asked, when you're employing someone, when you are getting a job, this is for master's graduates, what is most important for the company? 100% quality, ability to translate in one or more highly specialized domains, ability to extract and manage terminology. These were the top ones, okay, that were given. And as you can see there, all the companies replied that, well, not all, 62%. I mean, the one that wins is ability to produce 100% quality. So a lot of students were asking, should I specialize in one or two fields? The evidence from the companies is it's not that important. If you can translate accurately from your languages and know your languages very well, that is more important than having specialized field knowledge, and that in turn is more important than being able to do terminology. That's what the companies are saying. Do you believe that? Is that the way you're going to orient your profession, or should we orient our masters on the basis of this survey? It's what can be done, because they then get a list of competencies that should be taught in a master's like this one, and we get, based on the company's replies, which is most important, produce 100% quality, identify client requirements, this would be the Scopus, Auftrag type thing, define or apply quality control, which is interesting, because if you've got 100% quality, you shouldn't need quality control, but there it is, etc. Okay. Note that experience is fairly in the middle of the list, okay, and that the value of a university degree, can you see it there, is down there at 77%. Means that when you go for a job, yeah, it's nice to have a degree, but your employer will probably be looking at these other things even more so. Experience tends to trump a degree. Okay. Now, my problem is, if you ask a company what they produce and you give them a list of things, and one of those things is 100% quality, Could you imagine a language service provider or a translation company saying, oh, no, we only give 80% quality, or 75% is good enough for most cases, or we only give 100% when it's really, really important? This discourse is like shooting yourself in the foot if you're selling translations. Why is this? Well, when a company sells translations to a client, I'll talk about this in 2 weeks' time, the client by definition doesn't know what's in that text. Have I mentioned this? That buying a translation is like buying a second-hand car, a used car, a pre-loved car. You might have done this. You know, you buy the car, it looks great on the outside, it's shiny, but you don't know what's inside that because you're not a mechanic. And you have to buy it on the basis of what it looks like. But the quality is an unknown factor. You want a translation into Chinese, and you don't know Chinese, it's like buying a car. You don't know what's inside there. Okay? You would like some kind of certification or trustworthiness, but absolute knowledge of quality? No. And the person selling the car, what are they going to say? Oh, well, this one's going to break down after 20,000 kilometers, so don't touch that one. And this one over here is going to need a new carburetor. And no, they don't have that anymore. Anyway, they're not going to tell you the truth, are they? They would be crazy if they did. Okay? So asking people this question it's a tautology. It's not a real question. People were obliged to say, yes, 100% quality, because the discourse of selling this product requires that statement. If you said, which is more important, speed of delivery or quality? That's an interesting question. Because all the companies will say, yes, we give you speedy delivery and 100% quality, but then if you ask, well, which is more important? And if it's faster, does quality decrease? You might get a more interesting modified discourse. Oh yes, of course, top quality requires a second revision or a third revision, and that may require a week more for a large project. And you begin to see the quality is actually relative. It's a myth circulated by a very facile discourse on the industry, and which has been recycled into our image of what we should be producing in our masters. That said, I hasten to add that I think the most important thing for me personally in any master's graduate and master's program is knowing the languages very well. And if that's what 100% quality means, I personally would underline it as being key, a sine qua non. However, they're not quite doing that here. Here, that's dressed up as quality. Let me now look at the relations in turn and to see where they come from and what they're doing in the way we talk about translation. The respect for the start text may be specific to Western translation theories or translation discourses on quality. Actually, I went round looking for the bits in the Luther Bible that tell you, thou shalt not add to or take away from the word of the Lord. Oh, don't touch the Bible. Don't put your bit in it. Don't take it out. It's certainly there. Our Western religions tend to be based on the book and the sacred word, and the thing that is there, printed, written, reproduced in the book, and the translations should not add to them or take them away. Which is actually quite interesting, because when I searched around to get these passages, lots of people ask the obvious question, hey, how come the Bible, some have more books than others? How come the Catholic Bible isn't the same as the Protestant ones? What do we do with these added books that are sort of apocryphal? They're there, but they're not there. Okay, but the fear of changing the text is part of this religious culture that we have inherited, I suggest, and is even more pronounced in Islam and Judaism, religions of the book. Cultures that have not had religions of the book tend to be far freer in their traditional attitudes to translation. The Indian tradition, which has its great epics, but the epics, Bhagavad Gita, Mahabharata, are not books. They are collections of stories that are performed and reperformed and adapted and retold in many, many different ways, like the Hindu gods themselves, which are reproduced and adapted. So Harish Trivedi, an Indian scholar, argues that before Western colonization, there was nothing in the Indian tradition that corresponds to our concept of translation. Everything was retelling. Anuvad, the Sanskrit word for translation now, actually means to say again, to tell it again. A relation in time, not in space. Übersetzung is spatial. Anuvad is telling it again in time. Continue, adapt, diversify the tradition. A religion of the book has trouble with that. We tend to distinguish between what is translation and what is adaptation, Bearbeitung, everything else. So the respect for the source text is apparently entrenched in our cultures and is still there. It's still the way you're trained, I suspect. When you have translation classes, you're all looking at the same text, trying to get close to that text. Is that not the case? I wonder why. Of course, if the word of God in the Bible is divine, any translation will be inferior to it, which creates a problem for Christianity. It doesn't create a problem for Judaism or Islam, where translations are mere secondary representations. Hebrew and classical Arabic are perfect, divinely inspired languages, and that solves that problem. The Christian tradition, though, has long depended on translation. So when we get to the New Testament, and you get especially to the work of Paul, you have this separation between spirit and letter. And the role of the Holy Spirit becomes key because that spirit can justify a translation having a sacred status. So we find the Septuagint and Jerome's Vulgate being accorded divinely inspired status because not of the passage from letter to letter, but because of the spirit which animates them. Okay. Christianity accepts that humans can attain perfection by having divine inspiration, and that's your guarantee of quality. It's in the Bible. If you get the modern translations of the Bible, at least in English, I don't know, German has this interesting constant updating of Luther, but the English translations tend to be by a committee of people, and somewhere in the introduction you'll find the translators were united in their belief in the divine nature of the Holy Script, or something like that. That between them there was this spiritual coming together. The Holy Spirit works through the translators to guarantee the quality of the result. There's something still in there when we talk about function. Isn't function a kind of spiritual thing? You can't touch a function. You can only construct it and believe in it, like faith in the divine. Functionalism needs to be questioned critically, I think, in its essentialism. There's a bit of the Holy Spirit moving there. However, I digress. That's for another day. The industry these days works a lot with machine translation. More so, well, what's happening, as I'll explain later, machine translation